Alright guys, today we are starting our unit on learning, and this is a really neat unit, but anyway, this picture of this crying baby signifies an important experiment that was done in the early 1900s on a little baby called Albert, and they were doing experiments on learning, and basically he was taught to fear something that he had enjoyed before, so it was kind of sad, but it was very intriguing. Before the experiment, he was not scared of rats, but after the experiment, he was. So, learning is achieved through experience. Anything we are born knowing how to do is not a result of learning. For example, we don't learn to cry. But people do need experience to learn how to walk, how to speak the languages of our parents and communities, and how to read. And these experiments through which we learn all of these things can vary. Sometimes we learn to do things by trying them ourselves. Other times we learn by watching. And so that we're going to talk about all the different ways you can learn. Ivan Pavlov was a psychologist from Russia that pioneered research into a form of learning known as classical conditioning. And classical conditioning can help people adapt to the environment and eliminate fears or other behaviors. A good example of classical conditioning is food aversions. Or, like if you're hungry and you think about food, your mouth waters. Or you salivate. A stimulus is something that produces a reaction or a response from a person or an animal. And a simple experiment that also demonstrates associations. If you think of a food that you really like lasagna or enchiladas or something like that, if your mouth starts watering, then you're experiencing the results of conditioning or learning. Conditioning works through the pairing of different stimuli. In particular, your reaction demonstrates a type of conditioning known as classical conditioning. And this is a simple form of learning in which one stimulus, in this case the thought of food, calls forth the response, your mouth watering, and that is usually called forth by another stimulus, the actual food. And this occurs when the two stimuli have been associated with one another. Pavlov was really interested in learning about the nervous system and the relationship between nervous system and digestion, and so he was studying salivation, but he soon discovered that the dogs did not always wait until they received the meat to start salivating. And so at first he viewed the dog's unwanted salivation as a nuisance because it was getting in the way of what he was trying to study, but soon he decided that this was a problem worth looking into. And if they could they could start salivating in response to the clinking of food trays, could they learn to salivate in response to any stimulus that signaled meat? And he predicted that they could. And so he started ringing bells and then bringing food, and that's how it started. These four terms over here can get kind of confusing, but an unconditioned stimulus is a stimulus that causes a response that is automatic, not learned. And that automatic response in turn is called an unconditioned response. A conditioned response is a learned response to a stimulus that was previously neutral or meaningless. And in Pavlov's research, the bell was a neutral stimulus. So before Pavlov associated with the meat, it might have made the dog's ears perk up, but it would not have made them salivate. However, once it became a conditioned stimulus, through repeated association with the meat, however, the bell became a learned stimulus, or what we would call a conditioned stimulus. And this is a better visual to help you understand that. I highly encourage you to get a screenshot of this and put it in your notes. So, classical conditioning helps organisms adapt to their surrounding environment. For example, just as Pavlov's dogs learned that the bell signaled meat, a person's pet dog may learn that the sound of a can opener means that dog food will appear in their bowl. So the dog comes running to the bowl. One form of classical conditioning that can be particularly useful to people is the taste aversion. And this is an avoidance of a particular food. So if you've ever eaten a food that made you ill and now you never want it again, that is taste aversion. Extinction when a conditioned stimulus, like the scent of an animal or a car alarm, is no longer followed by an unconditioned stimulus, like a dangerous animal or a car being broken into, it will eventually lose its ability to bring about a conditioned response, and this is called extinction. It occurs when the conditioned stimulus is disconnected from the unconditioned stimulus. Spontaneous recovery is simply what it says. It's the reappearance of an extinguished conditioned response after some time has passed. And you can't have spontaneous recovery without extinction. And these are two terms that are easy to remember. Generalization, it would be like you got bit by a dog when you were younger, or you got bit by a chihuahua when you were younger, and now you're scared of all dogs. It doesn't matter if it's a chihuahua or a pit bull. And discrimination is... it would be like if I'm at the playground with my kids and there's a bunch of other kids there and they're all yelling mom, but I never look up until Jonah actually says my name, because I can discriminate his stimuli to any others. Some applications of classical conditioning. In flooding, a person is exposed to a harmless stimulus until a fear responds to that stimulus, or is extinguished, I'm sorry. So like a person with a fear of heights might look out a 6-story window until she or he can be okay with it. Although flooding is usually effective, it tends to be quite unpleasant, and when people fear something, forced exposure to it is the last thing they want. So for this reason, psychologists usually prefer to use systematic desensitization to help people overcome their fears. And this is just when they're taught relaxation techniques and they're gradually exposed. And counter conditioning is when a pleasant stimulus is paired repeatedly with a fearful one, and that counteracts the fear. And current research, we have a lot of stuff going on with virtual rats. I encourage you to read this right here. And that's it for today, guys. Thanks.